In this video, we're going to be focusing on the methods by which you undertake your research. So when we're looking at this idea of even what research is, it's the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So when you're researching a specific topic, you need to look at it systematically. So this is step by step and logically. You're studying all of the materials and the sources that you gather to find out factual information, so things that you can prove to be true in one way or another. And also you're hoping that your research will reach a new conclusion about the way things are. So these are all things that will go into informing your research and make it valuable for other people. When we're talking about research, there's two kind of modes that we need to think about. The first of these is primary research, which is also referred to sometimes as field research. This is where you're gathering new data that hasn't been collected before. So this might take the form of surveys and tallies and questionnaires and will involve different types of sampling. That's something that we'll come to a little bit later. The other type of research that you're going to be looking at is secondary research. So this is desk research, it's often referred to as. Here you'll be gathering together existing data that has already been produced by other authors and other researchers. This might be, you might find this information through looking online on the internet, looking in books or newspaper, or maybe through things like company reports. So anything that is a published document could be used as part of your secondary research. When you're starting out on your research project, before you even work out what methods or methodology you might use, you need to ask what type of information is required. You can do this by asking yourself two questions. What exactly am I trying to find out? And how will I need to present my findings? What information is required to present them in those particular ways? When you're examining your sources, you're going to be using two different methods for examining those. These will be quantitative, that will involve counting numbers and statistics, and also qualitative. This is to do with marking down opinions and experiences, things like that. Now, when we're thinking about primary research, it's probably useful to look at a few of these different methods so that we understand them a bit better. One that you may have encountered already is the idea of surveys. So this is where questions are asked using a standard set of questions, maybe over the phone or by post or online or face-to-face. This can give you a wide geographic spread, so because you don't have to always be face-to-face with the person who you're surveying, and sometimes people will need some incentives to take part, because completing a survey can take time. The next method I'd like to look at are focus groups, and this is where a small group is asked qualitative questions by a facilitator. So this helps to measure attitudes and beliefs and opinions, and also has the potential to go deeper into issues and ideas than a simple survey or questionnaire would. Even more in depth than that is the face-to-face interview. So this is where people would be asked specific questions by a trained interviewer. Now, because it's in a one-to-one type of situation, it can make this method more expensive because there's a lot of time and there's a person always there and involved in the activity. Also, because of this, you'll probably only be able to have a number of limited people involved in your study or in gathering the information you're looking for. Observations are another type of surveying that we might have a look at, and this is where consumer behaviour is viewed and recorded. So This is really about spotting patterns. And we can see how this might be useful if we look at the example of how it's used in supermarkets. So observers station themselves in the supermarket and watch what the shoppers are doing. So they don't interact with them, they don't ask them why or what they're planning to do. They just watch how they navigate around the store. And this helps supermarkets to place products in specific areas, maybe to ensure that they're selling more of a certain product or that it catches your eye at a specific point in your journey around that store. It can also be useful for looking at what people are doing in certain areas of a building or of a public space. So this would have applications maybe in museums or galleries or different kind of centres where people gather. With any of these research methods, there's an important thing that we should have a look at, which is called sampling. So sampling takes place because you can't survey everyone in a market or in a population. Usually those markets or those populations are far wider than you'll have resources for. So there are two different types of sampling that people will use, that researchers will use. The first is called quota sampling. So this is where you're creating a group to mimic the characteristics of a particular market or a particular population. And an example of this would be in an area where 30% of the population are over 70, then the quota sample that you're using, the number of people that you're asking questions to, or the number of people that you're observing, needs to match this 30%. The alternative to this is called random sampling. And this is where the group who are questioned in whatever way is created by chance or at an arbitrary point of some kind. So an example of this might be picking 100 people at random from a mailing list, or it might be surveying the first 50 people who walk through the doors of an institution on a particular day. When you're thinking about designing your research and your research questions, you'll be thinking about what questions you need to ask. And this all depends on what type of information you're looking for. So you can ask open-ended questions, things like, what do you think about XYZ different thing? This will give you descriptions and narrative snippets of different kinds, this open-ended format. And those are the types of qualitative information that you might be looking for. This is really useful for when you need to explore a topic more widely than a yes-no type answer would allow you. Also, it can be used in your first steps towards identifying specific things to research further. It gives people an open platform to feedback, which can definitely be quite useful for arts organisations. And it gets people to describe their experiences, which in itself can be a useful process. So getting people to think about and pinpoint the experience that they're having can help them work out what's going on and help you as a researcher also work out what's really going on in a situation. There are some downsides to this open-ended type of question, and they are really that you need to read every response carefully to identify different common themes as they come up. So if you're surveying 50 different people, you're going to have to read carefully those 50 different responses to try and tease out the information and identify common themes that crop up. You also need to be very careful about how you word your questions so that they're unambiguous and that they can't be mistaken for one thing or another. All of this makes it harder and takes it longer to analyse this type of information when you get it back. And this analysis process can also be biased. So it'll be down to whoever is analysing the information to interpret what people mean by their comments. The other type of question that you might be asking are closed questions. So this is something like, how often do you do X, Y, Z? Or things that might be on a scale of 1 to 5. So that might go from never to always in this example, and all those points along the scale. This type of question will give you numbers and percentages as its answer. This is quantitative information, and there are some times when that's going to be really useful to you. So closed questions will give you information that's useful for presenting in a graph form, for making analysis of information more simple and straightforward. So rather than having to read all 50 of the survey answers, you can very quickly tally up how many people have answered in a specific way to a specific question. There are, of course, downsides to this method as well. So it can be too directive. So you might not give people space to actually work out what they want to say. You're giving them a very closed set of options. This kind of limited choice of options might mean that people feel that there's a kind of none of the above, so that none of the things apply to them. And the questions in this case, rather than the person who's analysing them, might be biased. So again, wording those questions becomes really, really important in this type of research. So now that we've looked at a number of different ways to gather research, gather information, which is the best of these ways? We're coming back to those questions that we started with. Think about what you need to find out. And always there's going to be some elements that are more or less appropriate. You'll probably start with secondary research, so with desk research, working out what's already out there, what research other people have undertaken, and what information or what findings you can gather from that existing research. If there are things that you find out that you can't answer through that information, then you're probably going to want to undertake some primary research. So these are those field research methods that we were talking about early in the video. So things like surveying or observation, asking all of those different open and closed questions. You're going to need to collect some quantitative information, so there will be some numbers or statistics within your information. And also there'll probably be some qualitative information, so some opinions and experiences. You can see by looking at these 4 points that there isn't one that is a single best way to gather information for research. So really think about which is the most appropriate, and you're probably going to be using a mixture of these in any project, in any research that you're undertaking.